I would like both of you to talk a little bit about how restaurants in general, although you don't have a restaurant right now, he did for a very short period of time with Gloria. Tell me how restaurant food is changing all of us in the way we cook, in the way we go to farmers market. Why is this important?
It really wasn't very long ago that the notion of a gourmet meal in the United States was a steak the size of your torso and a baked potato the size of your head. It was really about big portions and value, and if you went to a restaurant and you got a meal and you didn't have like 4 pounds of food to take home in a doggy bag, you didn't get your money's worth. And I'm very grateful for the work that Jacques has done, Pierre Franet, Craig Claiborne, Julia Child, James Beard, Peter Kump, back during that very important time when this was the prevalent gourmet meal. There were some real leaders for us that could take us to a place where people stopped looking at food as something that they just had to do because they were hungry, almost like an inconvenience. Damn, I have to stop what I'm doing because I'm hungry. Where can I grab a quick bite? To something that's actually very important to us all. And from a flavor perspective, from an enjoyment and a celebration perspective, but also the connections that we're making now with food and human health. And I think we're starting to see that in restaurants. And I really actually would love to hear your take, Jacques, because you do so much traveling and you see so many of these young chefs and often asked to mentor. So yeah, for me, I think it's just that food is becoming more important, but I think you have a unique perspective.
But the restaurant world today is another world than it used to be. I came to the U.S. in 1959.
Oh, I thought you catered the first Thanksgiving.
No, there was no one born here when I came to. I certainly, at that time, you go, even Lutèce was a great restaurant in New York. They had a pre-theater dinner. You go to the pre-theater dinner to go eat, and then go to the theater or whatever. Now the restaurant has become the theater. People go there to be seen, to look at people. There was no cookbook. There was no, when I came to this country, there was Craig Claiborne just started at the New York Times. But there was really, I think there was something like 20 or 25 cookbook published the first year. I did a book called La Technique published in 1974-5. And I was lucky to be able to do the book because no one wanted to do a cookbook. However, if you publish a cookbook, you were almost sure that people would look at it because that same year there was maybe 30, 35 cookbooks published. Last year there were 2,700 cookbooks published in America. So wow, there is an embarrassment of riches. There is many incredible cookbooks who no one look at because I must receive, I'm sure you do, over 100 manuscripts a year asking me to do a quote or whatever. So cookbook, restaurant, food critic didn't exist. Food editor in different magazines, and of course restaurant. And the chef who used to be at the bottom of the social scale, any good mother would have wanted her child to marry an architect or a lawyer, certainly not a cook. Now we are genius. So we are.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that they want them to marry us.
See,
I don't think we bridged that gap yet.
Big deal, So it's a totally different type of world. So those great chefs that you see on. I was somewhere not too long ago, and there was a food historian talking, and he said there is 407 cookery shows on television now, between the Cook Channel Network, the Cooking Channel, Bravo, Lifetime, whatever. Which is absolutely amazing. I don't know if it's accurate, but if it's not 407, it may be 350 or whatever. So it's absolutely incredible the way the food has taken hold, in the family. And so the restaurant, are very big now, and people will go to a famous restaurant like yours to see a famous person like yours. If you're in your kitchen, cooking.
Almost famous.
So
You're famous.
It's big deal now. So in that context, going back to you, the original question, yes, if you go to the restaurant, you eat something, you say, where can I get that? And you start experimenting yourself. Now, I remember the supermarket. Going to New York, I live in New York City, in Manhattan, supermarket. Remember 1960 or whatever it was here not too long. I went there and said, where are the mushrooms? Aisle 7. Aisle 7 had canned mushroom. At that time, there was no fresh mushroom. So I'm not even talking about leek, shallot, tomato, all the oriental vegetable, different type of oil, olive oil, different type of vinegar. That didn't exist. I mean, it wasn't there. So now the supermarkets have never been as beautiful as they are today. So supermarket too, and he did a lot in that context. You're going to talk about food and the food that you should buy in supermarkets and all of that. So yes, it's a totally different type of world. So in that context, yes, restaurants are important. It changes your life. It gives you some idea. Usually the chef may have a book. You look at it, you go to the market, yes.
Speaking of cookbooks, I was on the internet, as I am, unfortunately, a little too often, and there was an article on BuzzFeed, Buzz something. I'm so old, I can
What's
hardly
wrong with
remember.
your accent?
I know, it's my accent. I'm from Connecticut. And it was an article where chefs were talking about the most important cookbooks that will change your life and change theirs. And the first one was Bourdain's, and he said La Technique was the most important cookbook he's ever written.
Anthony is a good friend. See, that's what happens.
What's that? Those checks you send him every month don't
Yeah.
hurt.
Yes.
No, I'm not sure.
Yes,
Okay,
and
fine.
actually, I'm trying to collect every one of your books. And I'm trying to do it on my own instead of just asking you, to get them all.
Thank you.
Well, it's sort of,
Thank you
it's
very
actually
much.
sort
That
of
was
fun.
really sly.
I
That was like,
No, actually,
I'm going to make a note of that. Where's my phone?
I have a lot of his books. I have used a lot of those books. And I happened to bring the one that Anthony Bourdain said was the most important one that he has ever read, ever. And I'm going to pass it around if you would like to see it.
Well, there is a new one of this called The New Complete Technique, and I have addition of color in there and so forth from other book. So, but this was the one before. So
As I
essentially,
said,
it's about the same.
He's not doing much of anything anymore.
Yeah.
A book a year, maybe more, and they're all wonderful. And then I'm going to pass this around too.
Maybe
This
you
is
should reverse
Michel
it because then
Nischan's.
they could hold mine because their arm's going to be tired from holding that one.
Oh, it is.
So
It is
big.
heavy. It is heavy. This is the one that Michel has written. You can cook from this one too, which I think is just a wonderful book. So I'm going to pass that around too if you'd like to see it. And they're not doing signings tonight, so this is what I wanted to do. Let's talk a little bit about farmers markets.
Okay.
And how important they are. And by the way, you have two beautiful.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yes, this.
I want to
this
hold
is
this
yes.
up.
so
Some-
exciting.
somebody gave us
It's
this,
from
man.
Huntsbrook
Check this
Farm,
out.
It's like
which is in
radishes.
Quaker Hill.
My God, we
Look at
Nasturtiums
this.
and sage.
Getting
and by
home
the
and
way,
Isn't this
cooking.
gorgeous?
Nasturtiums
I got
are
stuff
delicious.
in my garden.
There we
Yes.
go. These
Yes.
are just absolutely
We have
beautiful.
oregano here. We have sage. We have nasturtium.
Shallots.
Give me some olive oil. Oh yeah, shallot.
Hey, I'll raise you a shallot and get you a pepper. Is that the deal? This is awesome.
Isn't that just
Great.
beautiful? I'll
Who
take
brought
those
that?
away.
Yeah, thank you.
This
Don't
lady
take
right
them too
here,
far.
Huntsbrook Farm.
You. Thank you
Yes.
so much.
What is more special than a gift of food? In our society, and I was alluding to it a little bit in my earlier comments, it's food has become this thing that is a part of our budget that we want to save money on. Food has become a thing that we have to do simply because we're hungry and we have to eat to so many people. And at one time, the connection between ourselves and the people that actually grow and produce our food and steward our land and steward our environment was a very complete connection. It was like breathing. It was not knowing your farmer was like not having a doctor for your family. It was just unimaginable. And I think what's been particularly exciting for me, I come from a family, on both sides of my family, displaced farmers. My parents, my dad from Kentucky, 5 generations of farming since the late 1700s. My mother, 4 generations in southeastern Missouri. They were all farmers, and I watched from the time I was a small child and worked what was left of my grandpa's farm in Morley, Missouri, until I started working in restaurants. Basically, food go from this incredibly wonderful thing and cooking being a life skill that was just something normal. I mean, if you ask if one of my uncles asked you what you cook and you said you didn't cook, they would look at you like you had 6 heads. What do you mean you don't cook? How do you live? How can you not cook? So we had this dark age of about 4 decades where convenience was the key, inexpensiveness was the key, food that could last many months or years was the key, because then we could feed the world. And now that's coming back. And what's amazing to me is I think when the census was taken in 2000, we had about 2,300 farmers markets. In 2006, we were up to about 4,000 farmers markets, and today we're at about 8,700 farmers markets, over 1,400 of which are in food deserts or very poor communities. So it's exploding, as is the community gardening movement. There are a lot of people that say to me, because I'm all about the farmers market movement and buying directly from producers, it's not scalable, it's not feasible, it's a boutique thing. So I love to hold up that in 1943, Franklin Roosevelt gave a speech because in 1942, the USDA came out with their consumption census. And they used to do that until like the mid-50s, and then they saw no reason because we were getting bigger, getting out in agriculture. And in 1942, 48% of all fresh food consumed by Americans came from privately held victory gardens, because the rest of it in the larger farms had to go to feed the troops for the war. In 1942, we were at half the population we are today. So if those same backyard gardens were in production, 24% of the fresh food we consume would come not even from a commercial farm of any kind, from victory gardens. And today, less than 25% of the fresh food we eat in America even comes from America. So we were at scale. We were there through privately held victory gardens, small-scale farms, farm stands on the side of the road, even in cities like Chicago. In Brooklyn, people were raising their own goats and chickens. So to me, the question really is, what does scale really need to look like? Does it need to be 1 or 2 big companies that own 70% of the food system? Or really should it be like a few 100,000 small businesses with community ownership, with people with vested interests that are hiring local kids and really caring about their community? So there are a variety of ways to cut the cake, so to speak. But I really do believe that it's not boutique, it's not elitist. There are urban communities all over the country, urban and rural, where people now in poverty are using their food stamps to buy agricultural plants. You can buy 2 pounds of field tomatoes, for $2, or you can buy a tomato plant for $2 and have 30 pounds of tomatoes. And when you actually start growing and producing your own food and consuming your own food, it changes your personal economy. So I'm a huge fan of farmers markets. I think the quality of the food is undeniably far superior to anything that you can find in a grocery store. And I think the nutritional value is critically important when you can actually take a tomato and pick it off of the vine and put it on your table right now, because it's gotten 100% of the nutrients that those seeds need to be able to fall to the ground and create healthy tomato plants. That goes to you and your family. What better way to eat? Yeah.
Now, if both of you could help us understand what is regional, sustainable, local, how far away should our food be? And can I get a cantaloupe in February? Every once in a while, I need a cantaloupe in February.
You start.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can. I mean, there is nothing wrong. I mean, what the problem is very often is kind of a situation often we've seen with organic food and all that, which get to be very guru-like. I mean, if you don't have that, you cannot eat. Well, wait a minute, there is people who cannot afford that, and this and that. I mean, my mother was an organic farmer. My father was an organic farmer too. The word organic did not exist at the time, so they would know about it.
Because it was just normal.
since chemical fertilizer did not exist, and since fungicide, insecticide, pesticide did not exist, it would have been very expensive anyway. So no one used it, so everyone was an organic farmer. It was not like a big deal. As I said, the word organic did not exist. But basically in France, everyone had a garden because that's the way it was. When I came to America in 1959, not that long, after the war, and then when I went to the supermarket the first time I went into a supermarket because it just started here, actually, as well as in France. But I mean, hundreds and hundreds of packages. Wow. I mean, it was another way of buying, and I thought it was a good idea, actually, to have a big place where you could have everything in the same place rather than go 5 miles this for the fish, 10 miles there for the meat, whatever. It was a good idea, but to a certain extent, the food there, the meat was always great, and lobster and beef and all that, but the vegetable, I mean, I say you couldn't find parsley or anything like this. So it was totally a different type of world. So another 10 years later, when Alice Water on the West Coast opened her first restaurant, Chez Panis, and I knew her very well, and she had an organic farmer, she bought things from a farm, and I said, wow. I mean, I said, what's the big deal? I mean, all my life, I mean, anyone was yes, that's always the way we bought it. So I didn't see what was the big deal because it was so much
we lost our way.
I know it was so much part, but that was kind of revolution after the Second World War and the TV dinner and that type of prepared food. People kind of react against that. Organic garden came, health food store, woman liberation. In the 60s, all of that was social changes, which became very important too. And now we are moving into other directions. But of course, for me, I have any cookbook. At the beginning, it is a given that the best possible product that you have, the best possible food you're going to have. I mean, the chef is not a genius. Usually the least you do to the food, the better it is, I mean,
providing that the ingredients are excellent to begin with.
When you have to start hiding it because the food is so here, there, to the butter. So, what was your question?
I'll bring it back. So I think to me, it's interesting because you can really go overboard dissecting. What should the geography of local be? And I think, obviously in northern and southern California and a variety in Georgia, Alabama, there are some really amazing growing regions of the country where there isn't anything that you cannot raise almost all year round. And then there's the rest of the country, which is really challenging. So when you look at trying to oversimplify and dissect a local food system as within 80 miles or 100 or 150 miles or 200 miles, that's a challenge in North Dakota. It's a challenge in Wyoming. It's a challenge in Montana, some parts of northern Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan. It's there are areas of Michigan that are incredibly awesome, and there are areas of Michigan that are incredibly desolate, and they're a couple of 100 miles apart from one another. So I like to say that local is incredibly important, that locale also is important. So when I look at a state like North Dakota, which is very hard-pressed to grow enough fruits and vegetables to meet the needs of its population so that people can really have a healthy diet, but it's some of the best pasture land in North America, and just the hardships of the climate itself, if you have the right breed of herds, whether it's lamb or goats or cattle, grazing that land, the quality of the meat protein that you're going to get from that area of the country is incredible. That's something we should be shipping to other parts of the country. If you tried to have local beef on Long Island, you'd need to move 2/3 of the population off of Long Island to make room for the cows so that the third that's left would have enough beef to meet their vitamin B needs for the rest of the year. So there has to be some common sense to it. The problem I have is transporting stuff like water, transporting iceberg lettuce. If you're going to transport something of value, transport something of cultural value, of nutritional value, something that's nutrient dense. Trade has been something, back in Marco Polo's time, Marco Polo was responsible for the spices of India, making it, and for white rice, making it from Japan and Asia to Italy so they could have risotto, because it was farotto before that. So the long distance transportation of food is nothing new, and it was important to the cultural exchange. I don't think we need to blow that up, but there's no question that the majority of our needs can be met fairly locally or regionally. So looking at food sheds, watersheds, looking at really redefining who we are and where we are in the country based on what grows well in our place, doing great recipe work with that and having our regional or local identity from that, and then using it as a powerful trade lever. I don't think there's anything wrong with blending them through common sense.
Because basically we have to.
Right.
I think we have to. We can't unwind it to that level of 150 miles.
What I object to, which I have been, especially because of who I am, what I do, and so forth, market in California, where you go to those markets, and it's very sanctimonious and it's very condescending. If you don't buy that particular food, this is it. I mean, you're dead. No, I cannot eat if that thing is not pure. Yeah, give me a break.
Oh, it's like Portlandia.
You go to
Portlandia. Everybody see Portlandia on Saturday Night Live?
And
that's unbelievable.
You go to a restaurant, and they bring you a carrot and say, that carrot was born the 7th of May. Her name is Hilda. Give me a break. Give me the carrot. I mean, you go to a point where we go totally berserk one way or the other. I mean, yes, of course, organic food and all of that is much better for you. Of course, local food, you can afford it, you can. You cannot afford it, you still have to feed your family and do the best you can. At least if you cook at home, it's already something, So, but...
Yeah. How about sustainability, especially when it comes to fish or seafood? I mean, should I be scared about the shrimp that's now on the Gulf Coast?
No, actually there's some, what's been interesting as a result of the whole BP spill is the technology that the states of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama have brought to testing seafood to prove that there is no fossil fuel contaminant whatsoever. It actually goes through more rigorous certification than organics does itself. So no, I wouldn't be scared. I think when you talk about sustainability overall, obviously when we look at agriculture, I look at what's happening in Connecticut with the raw dairy producers, the pig, the chicken. Now we finally have a chicken slaughter facility here in Connecticut. Gary Proctor and a bunch of really amazing producers. Supporting that is priceless. And yep, the food's a little more expensive, but we really shouldn't be eating 12 or 14 ounces of protein. So I'd rather pay twice as much for the chicken, put half the chicken on the plate, have a really amazing chicken, and put a whole bunch of other really great vegetables and things on the plate. When it comes to seafood, you're talking about something that's going to transport. The quotient there is more about the population of marine life, right? That swordfish actually got to a point where the stock was 95% decimated. And we went in a short 11 years of the average size of a swordfish being boated at 375 pounds to pups that were under 70 pounds. And that was the only swordfish that was available. That's a huge problem.
Huge.
It's a massive problem. So there are a lot of really remarkable places where you can go for information. Blue Oceans Institute is off of Montauk here.
The Monterey Aquarium.
Monterey Bay Aquarium, the Marine Stewardship Council. Lots of resources out there on good choices that we can make so that we're buying more sustainable food. But interestingly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jacques because he's the expert at what to do with all the different fish and the parts of the fish. We had tonight blackfish liver. It was frickin' delicious at his house.
A guy brought me a big blackfish this morning. So.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
You know, so changing the way we think about fish is really important. Sardines are delicious. Mackerel is delicious. Yeah, they smell fishy. Fish should smell fishy. But again, it gets back to this portion piece of it. When people, and it applies to meat like it does seafood. Imagine what would happen tomorrow if everybody that ate fish or meat on the planet decided they were just going to cut that animal protein portion in half. Half of the CAFOs in the world would close, and the 90% depletion of stocks would turn into a 45% depletion of stocks overnight. So a lot of it is more than just, do I choose sardine or do I choose Chilean sea bass? It's, you know, if we were only eating 3 or 4 ounces of fish to begin with, maybe Chilean sea bass wouldn't be in the weeds right now and we'd be able to buy it. So there are a variety of complex things at play, but I think just the way we choose to eat, the fish we choose, and then the amount we choose to eat, it's in each and every one of our hands here to actually be that hero of a more sustainable food system just by being a little more thoughtful about the way we put food on the table.
And of course, where we live, I think that I have within 6 minutes 3 seafood outlets that I can go, and they will tell me where the fish came from.
Yeah, traceability is there.
Yes.
But I think what I would love Jacques to talk about things like hatušnaya. What's the bass roe?
Yeah, the poutargue, yes, poutargue.
Yeah, botarga. Yeah.
Botarga or poutargue. But
people
the
throw that
is
stuff away. Yeah, check this out.
You go in Long Island, and a lot of the fish are contaminated. You know, I mean, striped bass and all that. You're talking about sustainability, but there, again, you know, people say, eat the smaller fish, striped bass, because the big one, you know, so you have those type of problems as well. I gave a lecture a few years ago, some class at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and it was for chefs, it was like 30 chefs. We came, I don't know if you've been there, the aquarium is enormous, the amount of fish there. So I told the chef, I bet you $100 to any one of you who can tell me more than 10 fish that we have, can recognize 10 fish out of that, probably what, 500-600 type of fish. I couldn't either. Well, this looks like a striped bass, so how many fish do we buy on the market? If you look at that, we buy maybe 10 different type of fish. At the most, people barely ate skate and monkfish or stuff like this. Yeah. So otherwise, it's always the same too. I mean, you go in this aquarium, there's probably 1,000 different type of fish. No one eats those fish. I mean, there is many, many fish. So you go in place like that, certainly in Europe. We just came back on a cruise. As my wife and we were in all around the Iberic Peninsula, starting in Barcelona, Malaga, and so forth, from the Strait of Gibraltar to Casablanca, back to Cadix. And we were in Malaga. I mean, we go to a market in Malaga, to a restaurant in Malaga, where I had the guy to take me. It's a fisherman market. The fish come there. I mean, the sardine to start with. When those fish are fresh, the sardine are curled like this. You have a piece of wood, little strip of wood like that. And he goes through the sardine, 5 or 6. They are not scaled, they are not eviscerated, nothing at all. And he put them, they have an enormous stove, an enormous fire going on. The fire is done with olive big stump like this. So it's like mesquite, you know, it's really, really hot without any smoke. So they put those strips of sardine hanging there. So by reflection, they cook it, turn them around too. You have that. You have probably 15 different types of cuttlefish, shrimp, and all that we don't eat here, which are on the market too. But the freshness of it, they throw that on the grill, and then they put olive oil on top and coarse salt. There is no menu. The guy comes with plate. When it's cooked, he comes with the plate. They go in the dining room. There is like 300 people. It's big. It's on the beach, basically, with a big tent. And the guy will come around and say, mira, la sardina. Say, look, sardine. So he comes with plate like that. You say, I want one of those, I want one of this, There is no menu or anything like that. You just pick up your fish, and we end up eating like 15 different dishes with 4 bottles of wine for lunch. and incredible. And it was dirt cheap. I mean, we pay like $20, $25 a piece.
Amazing.
But that type of thing, using all of those products which come out of the sea. I remember in Clinton, I used to go there. I used to get soft shell lobster there, which is against the law. Anyway, when the lobster, changed its thing like soft shell clam. But then it was stuck in his net. So he said, well, you can have it because, it's going to die. But like 8 out of 10 fish coming out of that net, he would put them into lobster pot to feed for the lobster or whatever. Right. For bait, I mean, no one eats those fish. From crocker, So when I go fishing, I used to, I don't really anymore, but anything coming out of the sea, I eat one or the other. So we could do much better than we do. And we did that. I teach at Boston University for the last 31 years. And we did that a few years ago. A bunch of 10 chefs we took about 8 or 10 totally underutilized. We had to have the fishmonger, the fisherman, to give it to us. Don't throw them out. We'll get them, from Merluzzo or whatever. I mean, and we cooked, and people loved it. I mean, it's as good as any fish that you have, and it's plentiful in the sea.
Yeah. So I have a question for the audience. Has anybody ever heard the term garbage fish? Anybody? Mm-hmm. Okay, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in the South, gar was looked at as a garbage fish. Unless you go to New Orleans and you go to one of Dickie Brennan's restaurants and you have the gar balls, which is basically like a round crab cake made of gar, and it's one of the most delicious things that you'll ever eat. My mother used to pickle gar. They're really, unless it's absolutely poisonous, there's no such thing as a garbage fish. Uh-huh. And there literally are thousands of species. And what's interesting is what happens when we focus on kind of like our favorite fish, like if our favorite fish is swordfish or our favorite fish is red snapper or whatever it might be, when we deplete one species to extreme amounts, it really messes up the food chain. We really should be eating across the food chain like Jacques is describing, because then everything has an opportunity to catch up, or you don't see these catastrophic vacuums, almost like power vacuums for lack of a better term, in an entire food chain that are created because some food writer, no offense, wrote about how amazing Chilean sea bass is, and now it's on the menu of every cafeteria in the free world. So it's interesting, and again, it's just to me, one of the most amazing things. Like we go to Jacques' house. Jacques will say, if we have something like this, he'll say, "Oh, you come over, we'll have a glass of wine," and then he's like scrambling some eggs, and he's like slicing some weird orange-looking thing,
which is chicken next to the house. We have
that's
good
right. In using things like salting and curing and drying fish roe, harvesting the liver of a fish. God gave us the whole animal. They gave us the whole hog. They gave us the whole, whatever you believe in, God, the universe, whatever it might be, gave us that whole being. Who are we to take the fillet and throw the rest away? We're nuts. It's obscene. It's crazy. And it's just, I don't know if he'll invite you over, but if you go to Jacques' house, you can really see how incredibly delicious dry fish eggs are.
It's got to be 30 years ago. No, it's more. We've been married 38 years, right? It was before I was
married. Don't mess that one
more
up.
Than that.
Dude, you need that number.
No, 48, I'm sorry. 47? Feels like 48.
Oh!
So anyway, 47 years. So I think it was before I got married. So I was at Craig Claiborne. Craig Claiborne was the food editor of the New York Times, with Pierre Frenet, I work with too. East Hampton, he said, let's go fishing. The sea, Long Island, was like oil. There were all those other guys there. He said, oh, you're kidding. There is nothing this morning, though. I said, let's go anyway. So we go, no, we didn't catch anything. Then we see a trailer picking up fish, with the net, one of the commercial fishermen. So we get close to it, and we thought they were throwing away, the blowfish, those tiny blowfish.
Those are awesome.
All kind of 100 skate too, and all that. Say, can we have it? Sure. So we came back with like 30 pounds of fish, and those guys said, what do you mean it doesn't bite today? I mean, look at those. They couldn't believe it. After 2 minutes, the guy came and said, there is no bite on the thing. You didn't get those fish without. But But anyway, all of those fish, again, to prove my point, they throw it back on the,
Yeah.
And there is a thing, certainly the bouillabaisse we call in France, the bouillabaisse, and which is the fish soup, the classic fish soup. Then those are all rockfish. A lot of them tiny rockfish too, which full of bone you can. But you cook the whole thing together, tomato, garlic, onion. You put it through the food mill because of the bone, just to get the puree of the fish and the meat. That's the base of your soup and the best, very gelatinous type of fish. We use all of that, yes.
It's gorgeous.
Sure.
Now, tell me about, to go back to your farm, your garden,
Okay.
which your wife, Lori Nischan, who's right over here,
She's the
it's a
farm
big
manager.
one. Tell me about that garden.
Well, we started the garden. We bought our first home in 2001 in May, and at the time,
Interesting.
my mother was in the process of passing, and she really had everything to do with who I am today. She was a farmer from southeastern Missouri, and she could kill a hog and break it down, and really any animal, cure it, pickle it, roast
Big
it.
blood I need.
Do hams, do bacon,
To do
the
blood
whole thing.
transfusion.
And she, the blood is important, and we'll talk to you about how to do that. It's very delicious. The interesting thing that she really was able to expose me to was an almost dead way of culture at the time. When we went down and worked what was left of my grandfather's farm in Morley, Missouri, we were there 5 to 6 weeks every summer. We just thought it was normal there, and that anywhere there was a farm, that was normal to go down and turn compost and take mature compost out into the fields and drive it around with the manure spreader and let fields go fallow and taste the dirt when it was time to turn the melons, feed the animals, kill the animals, learn how to cook. It was just normal. And when I learned that I wasn't going to make it as a musician, and my mom talked me into getting a job in a restaurant so at least I would eat, I saw the food that was coming in the back door and what was available in grocery stores, I knew that something had gone horribly wrong. And it was all of that lesson, her insisting that we worked on that farm, teaching us that the juice inside a cucumber is rainfall, that there's life in dirt, because without the dirt, a seed and water won't go anywhere. It was around the time that my daughter was getting ready to go to college, our oldest daughter, Lauren, and I was looking at all of our kids and realizing in my busy life that I had not provided for them any of the metaphors that my mother had provided for me. And Lori and I really got on the mission of making sure that if we found, in looking for this first home, that we would find something where we could plant a garden, like my mother's garden. We tried to get it done before she passed. We weren't successful. But we were telling her stories about going out and digging the bean beds under a full moon in February, trying to get this garden done on time. And it's been remarkable for us. It's a 1/4 acre in full production, though some of it's slowly becoming perennials for a variety of reasons. But it produces an incredible amount of food. And we use the garden to supply the restaurant, to supply our family, to give to friends. And it's remarkable. It's completely organic. Now it's actually biodynamic because we do have chickens and we have manure now to heat up the compost pile. We have plenty of plant waste. And it's in its 11th or 12th year of production. 10th year, thank you, honey. It's remarkable. It's where my son, who is now 12 years old, fell in love with sugar snap peas when he was 2. And it's something. I think those who are interested in gardening or do a couple of, potted plant tomatoes or whatever, you really endeavor to take a little piece of land in your yard, no matter how small, and really grow some food just to understand what farmers go through. Flea beetles are a frickin' horror story if you don't know how to deal with them. In fact, actually allowing eggplant to be almost decimated by flea beetles, let the cycle of flea beetles end, and then watch how incredibly strong the eggplant come back and bear fruit because they were under threat, teaches us the value of a plant, not judging it by the number of holes in its leaf, but rather by, did it survive, and is that going to give you seeds that are now going to be more resistant to the flea beetle? So many metaphors of life in growing your own food, and really opens up a dialogue between you and your children, you and your neighbors, that you wouldn't have if you weren't doing it. I think, Lori herself, in being largely responsible for planning and planting and managing the garden and inviting so many people into it, she's changed people's lives through that garden. So those of you that are producers here, I just can't thank you enough for doing what you do, because I know how incredibly not easy it is. I know how so many of you have difficulty keeping the lights turned on in February, March, and April. And, until you actually try to grow food yourself, understanding the devotion that it takes to keep a plant alive and get delicious food off of it, or to birth an animal, to bring it back from almost dead from pneumonia, get it healthy and get it beautiful and know its name, and then one day to have to pull the trigger, because that is part of your business model, and none of us here can live unless the life of something is taken. You don't understand that until you try to do some of that yourself. So it's been a very important part of my life, and the way I translate what's important to me and my children.
Maybe one of the most important things is the way you raise your kid. Claudine, our daughter, when she was small, she's 4 years old. Mom, what's for dinner? Gloria would say food. And that's it. She's 47 now. It's still food for dinner.
Yeah, that's
so there is no discussion. It's not like, the kid eats spinach or Brussels sprout. The parent goes on their knees. Oh my God! No, we never discuss the food. We put it on the table. She ate. The kid will love string beans, and then she hates string beans for a month. Then she loves string beans again. All the kid goes in. We put it on the table. That's what we had tonight. So whether it was, pork kidney or sweet bread or a piece of chicken or whatever, didn't really make any difference for her. This is what we eat, and she loved it. So she got raised this way, and it's a question of, as I said, when you raise the kid, this is what we eat. We sit. The most important part of it, however, is to sit down and eat together. At least, where we used to do it in Europe for lunch, but at least once a day, an hour, and it's not always pleasant. When the kid came back from school, she was in junior school or high school, but every night we're an hour and a half at the table, sitting together. Otherwise, there is no communication. You don't talk to anyone. So this was a very, very important part of our life, and it's a very important part of her life now with our granddaughter, Shori, and all that. And as I say, after 48 years of marriage, I don't remember one day that we did not sit down at an aperitif. We have some white wine, and we have and share a meal and have a bottle of wine, sometime two.
3.
When I start cooking at 5 o'clock in the afternoon with a bottle of white wine, by the time we eat at 7 o'clock, it's finished. So we go to red. But yes, that's part of our life, and it's very, very important in our life.
Well, it's interesting. I think the aquaculture technologies are going to be important. If there weren't any, shrimp would be on maybe 10% of the world menus right now. The issue is the methodology and the rapid expansion of the practice. So there's an awful lot of aquaculture that's going on that's doing a tremendous amount of environmental damage. And just to be clear, there are a variety of issues. One is the amount of antibiotics and antiparasitics that go into food for salmon, for instance, because it very, very much like confined animal feeding operations, CAFOs, the big pig and cow factories that we all hear terrible stories about, and they are terrible. The same thing exists for fish. So you'll see salmon in pens about the size of this room. They'll have like 40,000 salmon in it. And they basically are just submerged below the surface of the water, and people will go out in boats, and the boats are completely filled with feed. They're not even in containers, and the workers are in waders wading in the feed and just scooping buckets of feed into the water. And in that feed are all of these antibiotics, dyes to make the salmon turn orange, because in the wild, salmon eats krill, and that's how it turns orange. So if you ever see a white salmon, it's because it lived its life in areas that were devoid of krill. And what these fish are eating incredible amounts of these inputs, but only about 11% of the food that gets thrown in the water actually gets eaten by the salmon, then goes to the bottom and creates very, very, very deep clouds of effluent. So wild fish will lay their eggs and it'll go to the bottom of the effluent, the eggs suffocate and they never hatch. The sea lice populations explode and then infect healthy wild fish populations. So it's a pretty egregious practice in most cases. There are some technologies that are happening now with more open water forms of salmon and hamachi and other types of fish, inland water aquaculture for things like tilapia, and I'm thinking, barramundi. There's a really great barramundi operation in western Massachusetts right now. So there are some responsible forms of aquaculture that are going on that are reusing water and having very low evaporation rates and using the effluents to make organic compost and do some really great things. So it's really important that if you're buying farm-raised fish, and we need to support it because we need these technologies to develop because the oceans are under a tremendous amount of stress because of the popularity of seafood. It's important to know who you're buying from and support the best practices and vote with your dollar that way. So what's been interesting lately is that Whole Foods, for instance, has gone to a policy where they will serve no red-rated seafood at all. They won't sell it anywhere in their freezer cases and their fresh cases, which is a pretty giant commitment. And more and more grocers now, Stop and Shop is starting to come online so that you can actually go and buy something that isn't farmed irresponsibly, because Whole Foods does do some farm-raised aquaculture, but they vet the farms, they visit the farms, they measure the inputs in the feed and have it scientifically tested to make sure they're telling the truth, because there aren't any certifications out there for farm-raised seafood. So it's interesting. But I'm a fan of wild, and I believe that if we actually could all endeavor to accept putting less animal protein on the plate and getting more of our protein from plant sources while we're enjoying a beautiful 4-ounce piece of wild-caught salmon. There's nothing like a piece of wild-caught salmon. I haven't had a farm-raised product that even comes close to it.
But there are. I mean, like the barramundi, for example.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. I love that barramundi.
I mean, they raise salmon there, but in very large area too. But this is practically like wild. A few years ago, I did a show for PBS in North Carolina on a farm of trout. We did because I did trout caviar there with them. And
Sally Eason's place.
Yeah, I forget what the show was called. It was. Oh yeah, Sally. Yeah, right.
Sunburst. Sunburst. Amazing.
And,
amazing
incredible
farm
because
trout.
It's an area which is pretty pristine, and they have picked up the whole river. They have diverted the river, and that's what goes through. So the trout will fight the currents and all that too. And then after the water is not only recirculated, but cleaned up to go back to the river. So it's really a very, very good operation. You have great trout there, the trout. So, there is people who are responsible. But the big problem is that when you had your question, you like wild or farm? Wow, it's a much more complicated question than that, because I said the Bay of Bundy area where you have some great, great fish, that's the way of, that's where we have to really look at and assist in people who raise animal like that. They raise it in a human, in a normal, in a good way, and that's very difficult when you are at the market. Sometimes you see salmon, $4.50, $6 a pound, and another one is $15, $25. You say, whoa. I mean, this one look good, it's fresh,
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm a huge fan of this, and it sounds elitist, but it's actually something I believe in. any protein that costs $4 to $6 a pound, that shouldn't be a goal. That shouldn't be a goal. I would rather spend the same amount on my plate at home and feeding my children, putting less protein on the plate than putting more of a cheaper protein on the plate.
But I think the customer are responsible too. You know, if
I
your
agree.
tomato is really lousy, it's hard like a rock, don't buy it.
Yeah.
After
Just
a
because
while,
it's
they
cheap.
will improve it because they say we don't sell those. They don't sell. We don't. So you know, it is a responsibility to the customer to ask for quality, to not buy if it's not good or whatever.
Agreed.
I mean, it's already a question of price versus quality. Of course, you can afford it, you can, but still, within that context, if you don't sell it, they are going to change it. You know, there's no way.
That's true. Absolutely.
We have gone longer than I thought we would, and there are probably some questions. But before we start that, would you tell people about the T-shirt you're wearing?
Oh, sure. It's gray, and it says Wholesome Wave. Thank you. Wholesome Wave.
It's a great,
Well,
great
first, yeah.
organization.
It's interesting because, you know, all of us in this room come from a place of privilege. There's no question about it. And all of us in this room actually can really decide whether we're going to have the wild fish or the farm-raised fish, whether we're going to buy from Firefly Farm or whether we're going to buy from Costco. We can make that choice and afford to make that choice regardless of what our personal feelings are about whether you should pay double for something or not. But there's no question that there are an awful lot of folks in the United States that just can't make that choice, period. And I came across this realization when I was doing a restaurant called Heartbeat back in the mid-90s in New York City, in the first W hotel that ever opened up. Up until the time that I opened Heartbeat, I always had believed
that when
in
you were
farm-to-table, local, organic, sustainable, buying from producers. And then in 1995, my oldest son, Lori and I have 5 children. You look at how beautiful she is. You can't imagine that she would ever have had 5 children. But our oldest son, Chris, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And it was a real wake-up call to Lori and I, really understanding and having to have that significant emotional event, wondering if we're actually going to be burying our child rather than it's supposing to be the other way around. And the scramble that we did to figure out what we could do to give Chris his best chance at a long-term outcome. And the doctors said food was one of the most important things. He's type 1, he has to have insulin every single day. That'll never go away, but the amount of insulin that he consumes or needs is going to have an awful lot to do with the food that he eats. And I changed the way I cooked. I was on a pretty fast trajectory to becoming a celebrity chef, all of the endorsements that come with all of that wonderful stuff. And I hit the brakes. When you cook for people, and I know that Jacques and Gloria as chefs are very much this way, when you're feeding tens of thousands of people a year, you're doing it because you want to please them. It's an act of hospitalitarianism. It's just, you care. And when you actually start to learn that the food that you're cooking might actually be harming unintentionally your customers, it really, it's a life change. So I changed. So I opened Heartbeat and was feeling really good about it until I started studying type 2 diabetes. Type 1 is insulin dependent. Your pancreas stops producing insulin for a variety of reasons. You have to have it for the rest of your life. Type 2 is actually created by the food we choose to eat. So it's what basically happens is your body becomes insulin resistant because when you eat a lot of highly processed food, really cheap food, and you're pounding your body with glucose, your body starts to resist the glucose by becoming resistant to insulin, which is the delivery mechanism for glucose, which is what all carbohydrates turns into, and you have to have it for your cells to divide and multiply. Over 40 million people in the United States suffer from type 2. 2 million people suffer from type 1. And when I started learning about it and learning that over 60% of the people that suffer from type 2 live in communities, this disease that can be stopped dead in its tracks by food can be completely prevented and in the early stages reversed. 60% of the people suffering from it can't afford to make the choices that would keep them from doing that. So in 2007, it took a while when I was standing in Heartbeat and got very depressed that I was patting myself on the back for feeding people who could afford to buy an entree for $40, local, organic, sustainable food of well-being. My partner Gus Schumacher and I founded Wholesome Wave, and we figured the easiest way to help people in poor communities make better food choices wasn't by preaching to them or over-educating them. We encountered plenty of mothers and fathers and caregivers and single parents with children that knew they should be feeding their kids more fruits and vegetables and better food, actually knew how to cook. They just couldn't afford to buy the stuff that they should be cooking for their kids. So we started raising private money and doubling the value of food stamps when they were spent at farmers markets on locally grown fruits and vegetables. In 2007, when we founded, we were in 3 states and 10 farmers markets. Today we're in 28 states, over 400 farmers markets, serving 50,000 SNAP consumers, supporting 3,200 small and local farmers. We're really proud of that. So that's our marquee program. We do fruit and vegetable prescription programs, and we also have a business development arm now that's looking at treasury policy to help entrepreneurs in these underserved communities meet this incredible demand for fresh food. So that's what Wholesome Wave is about. I believe, as Jacques believes. Oh, thank you.
And it's very important because, in one word, is that food stamp. People get food stamp. They go to the market. With this system, you get double the amount of food that you get with your normal food stamp. So a lot of people who never use their food stamp to buy organic product or whatever can now buy it for basically the same price than regular product.
And it's amazing.
That's a big improvement because that addresses a portion of the population who was never exposed to that type of food, organic and all that. And that's very good because that you're doing really inroad there.
Thank you, Jacques. So I'm just going to use the opportunity to tell you just how great it is. What we've done is we've studied the impact on small and mid-sized farms, which we consider classic American small businesses. Farmers add more land in production, they diversify their crop plantings, they make infrastructural improvements to their farms, and they hire more people. And we collect that data and we share that in Washington. In the SNAP consumers, last year 3,200 food stamp consumers filled out a consumer attitude survey. The number one reason of importance for participating in the program was quality of produce. Quality of produce. When we accepted that the market's accepting food stamps would be the number one reason, it wasn't. Quality of produce was number one. Accepting food stamps was number two, tied with supporting local farmers and businesses. So what we found is that when people living in poverty, affordability is not a barrier. They're the same as all of us. They want to give their children a better life than they had. They want to feed their kids the best food that they can. They want to participate in their community and be able to go anywhere they want to be able to buy their food that other people can. They just want to be good neighbors. But affordability definitely is a huge divide in our society. So we found that just the simple act of doing this is important, and it's been so successful that there's language in both farm bills that passed the full Senate, both farm bills that passed the House Ag Committee, and then the farm bill failed, and still even in the really poor nutrition bill that the House passed, our incentive program is in there because of these facts and the different face we've been able to put on people living in poverty, the way they want to feed their families, and that this is really great business support for classic American small businesses, our farmers. So it's good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm so happy.
Thank you.